We take a single episode of a science fiction TV series and overanalyze it to within an inch of its life. This is the Fusion Patrol Podcast. Welcome to the discussion. Hello and welcome to another episode of Fusion Patrol. I'm your host, Eugene, and this evening I have guest host Simon with me. Good evening, Simon.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
It's always good to have you. How are you today?
I'm extremely well, thank you. How are you?
I'm getting better. Better than last time we did the Prisoner. And
I'm pleased to hear it.
We are doing The Prisoner tonight. Patrick McGowan's surrealistic classic work of television art. And that's not at all pompous, is it? Tonight's episode will be A, B, and C, arguably the third episode of The Prisoner. We'll start off with a brief synopsis. I will try to keep this one a little shorter than last time's synopsis of the episode. It's morning in the village, and the new number 2 speaks with his superiors on the red phone about number 6. He is clearly under pressure for results, and he knows he's not indispensable. He calls number 14, and over her objections that the drug isn't tested yet, tells her the experiment must be performed tonight. That night, the unconscious form of number 6 is hauled into a laboratory. They have a machine that can image what he dreams. They hook him up and watch. All they see is number 6 playing over his resignation again and again. Number 2 is convinced that number 6 resigned because he was going to sell out to someone. He has narrowed the list down to 3 possible suspects. They are identified as A, B, and C. They, along with number 6, are known to have attended the parties of Madame Engadine in France. Number 6 is given a drug which allows them to feed images and sounds into his brain. They hope to place him in his dreams at Engadine's party with each of the suspects so that he will reveal who he was going to sell out to and what he was selling. The experimental process works. Number 2 and number 14 look on into number 6's dreams as he is now at the party, just hours after his resignation. He meets A, a former agent who has previously defected. A attempts to convince him to come over to his side, and when these attempts fail, A has number 6 kidnapped and taken to a foreign embassy. There, number 6 puts up a fight and defeats A and his minions. It is clear he was not selling out to A. Number 2 wishes to proceed with B, but number 14 tells him number 6 needs time to recuperate, and they cannot proceed until the next night. Number 2 is nervously reminded of the red phone and his need for swift progress. The next morning, number 6 feels poorly. He sees number 14 and vaguely remembers her from the night before. He checks his arm and sees the mark of the injection. He approaches number 14 when she's having coffee and tells her he doesn't know how to talk to a woman he met in a dream. She rebuffs him and leaves. He visits number 2 and conspicuously shows him the wound. Number 2 ignores it. So 6 points out that an innocent person would have asked how he got it. After he leaves, the red phone rings. Number 2's head is on the block if he doesn't get results soon. At bedtime, number 6 drinks his drugged tea and is soon back at the dream party, shortly after the altercation with A. B is a woman. They meet in the arbor. Instead of talking business, he steers her to dancing. Is he somehow resisting? They try putting words in her mouth. She asks for help, says they are going to kill her if she doesn't get some information. She asks why he resigned. Number 6 in turn grills her about personal questions. It's clear that he thinks she's a fake. He goes to leave, but goons appear to stop him. He beats them up. Another puts a gun to B's head. She pleads that they'll kill her if he doesn't talk. He walks away, leaving her to her fate. In the morning, number 6 finds number 14 and follows her to the lab. He finds his way in and works out what's been happening. He dilutes the remaining drug and then waits for bedtime. He tips the tea down the drain, then drinks a glass of water. He falls to the floor, apparently unconscious again. Now 6 is the hunter. He plays with him. The party is different, wild, and outrageous. The scene is distorted and crooked. Number 14 fears the strain is too much for number 6. Then, by sheer force of will, number 6 approaches a crooked mirror and, grabbing it, straightens both the mirror and the dream. The scene is normal now, but the party is still wild. He digs at them with lines like, "It's a dreamy party." Number 2 doesn't actually know who C is. They pump in as much info as they can in the hopes that 6 will reveal who it is. A woman approaches him. gives him her diamond earring and tells him 6 is your lucky number. He puts the earring on black number 6 on the roulette table and wins a key. Looking around for the lock that it fits, he is met with another carrying an identical key. It is Engadine. She warns him that if he proceeds on this course, he can never turn back. He agrees and shows her the papers he has to give. She takes him for a meeting with her superior, a masked man. Number 2 is frustrated. He is on the brink of discovering with whom and with what number 6 was selling out, but it's all still concealed from him. Number 6 refuses to turn over the papers until he sees who the masked man is. There is a struggle, which number 6 wins, of course, and he announces that everyone watching must see who the masked man is. He rips off the mask and turns him towards the watching number 2 and number 14. It is number 2. He walks away and through the doors, which lead back to the village. He walks up to the lab where number 2 and number 14 are watching, and he tells number 2 he promised he could see the papers. He hands them over to the dream number 2. Number 2 opens them. They are vacation brochures. He was going on holiday. Number 6 lies down on the table and goes back to sleep. The red phone rings. Okay, well then, let's just start. What did you think of this episode?
Well, this is certainly a much more science fiction kind of episode compared to the much more sort of espionage-centric stories that we've had in the first couple,
Yes.
with the whole concept of being able to read dreams or being able to manipulate dreams.
I mean, this is, and again, if you're looking at them in this order, this has got the most science fiction concept of any of the stories that they have so far. Although, I think we've mentioned before, there's a lot of things in the village that are science fiction or were science fiction when the show aired, and now a modern audience might look at it and not even, think twice, like all the little phones that don't have cords on them.
Yes, it's interesting to speculate, given that these other bits of science fiction for them at the time must have been what they imagined tomorrow's technology would be like, whether they thought the same thing about kind of dream reading technology, because to some degree, I mean, I know that there's obviously still a certain amount of interest in this kind of thing, and the film Inception springs to mind as an example of this sort of thing, but I don't think it may have been a kind of particular 60s concern, this idea of kind of brain reading and being able to completely visualize on a screen someone's imaginative life. But I don't think we think that's quite so close now. In fact, if anything, we probably underestimate how brain-computer interfaces have advanced. So in terms, if you take something like Inception, there's a lot more explanation of what's going on with this. Whereas in this story, you don't get an awful lot. I mean, you get the kind of basic setup with the kind of fancy oscilloscope showing whatever his brain waves were doing or whatever it was, and then a certain amount of hand wavium, and then, oh look, you can see it on a television screen.
I think there was certainly back, I don't remember when they started understanding the notion of brain waves per se, but I think there was a belief that brain waves could ultimately be read once they understood the patterns. And if you recall, if this is late 60s, during that time, there was a lot of thought, there was a lot of promise in the use of things like LSD in psychotherapy, which has since been abandoned, but they felt that dreams were more important than they really are, that there was more meaning to them. So I can see this as being something that would grow out of that particular environment, and then, has not played out because it turned out that for starters, reading brainwaves doesn't work like that, and pumping it full of drugs does not actually produce truth. It produces scrambled brainwaves. So, I can see how this would fall under that brand of science fiction from that era.
So, because the explanations were quite cursory, the drug itself was, I take it then, in order to ensure that somehow he wasn't lying in his dream. It was more about truth than about being able to interface with the dream reading equipment.
Yeah, they didn't really give a lot of that, but they did say they would test it in animals. So I'm not exactly sure how that would how they could test whether an animal is telling the truth or not.
I'd love to watch on TV what badgers dream about.
Give it a few years and probably that will be what we get on television. Be the next stage after reality TV.
But one thing you mentioned was that he diluted the serum, but I thought that he actually entirely emptied the serum and refilled it with water. And so he was, this is the third time round, so what he was actually doing was interfacing then with the dream reading equipment, but somehow because he hadn't taken the drug, he was able to exercise his free will.
He did leave a little of the fluid behind because it was kind of purple.
Ah, I see.
And
right. So there was a little bit in the syringe.
Right. So then when he pulled it back up with water, it was still had some color to it.
So it might be that the serum was somehow part of being able to interface with the machine, but by weakening it, he wasn't in such a deep dream state or something. Because I'm thinking, normally in a dream, you kind of go where the dream goes. You may imagine you're controlling things, but somehow when the dream jumps around, you don't necessarily think that's surprising, even if it suddenly takes you from your bedroom into the middle of a school assembly or something.
Now, some people can exercise some control over their dreams, and apparently that's something you can teach yourself, but it's not something I've ever tried or actually really wanted to do. The only thing I ever want to do is control myself is to get out of them. I'm not really a big fan of dreaming.
Maybe that's something they teach in espionage school then.
It could be. And his espionage skills are on top form today. In this episode, I like how this is their opportunity to get him out of the village and kind of put him in a more classical spy environment at the party. And you can see he's, everybody knows him and he's, in the dinner jacket and,
James Bond style. Very
James Bond. And he gets in with the spy, who is a former British spy. That's my understanding. Assuming that number 6 is actually a British spy, because it's never actually said he's a British spy. But assuming that number 6 was a British spy, then A was also a British spy who defected for money to the other side. And, it's a very pedestrian sort of, give me your secrets. No, I'm not going to give you my secrets. I'm going on vacation, and take him out to an embassy, and they have a right out of a 1960s episode of The Saint kind of punch up outside the car. I mean, I almost think they were parodying the fight, but I think it's just the ITC stuntmen. I enjoyed that. I actually enjoyed seeing it kind of cross over with that 1960s, not reality, but that genre of spy shows. That was, I don't know. This episode, I really enjoyed this episode. This is one of my, 5 to 10 favorites, of The Prisoner. Just maybe not narrowing it down enough, but it's up
top
there.
2 quartiles then.
Exactly right.
It certainly is wonderful to see Peter Bowles in it. As they say, his face looks vaguely familiar, and he's certainly a kind of stalwart of those things. He was in a couple of episodes of The Avengers, and I think he'd kind of cornered a market in a kind of Terry Thomas villainy at that point. But with
that
the
mustache,
slightly more, yeah, but with the kind of slightly more suave, very kind of easily likable air. And Dial a Deadly Number is one of my favourite Avengers episodes, where they have a fight in a wine cellar, and Steed disarms him by shooting his pistol out of his hand with a champagne cork. It's absolutely classic.
I remember it well. Let's see. Interesting thing is that the 3 people are identified as A, B, and C. We still don't get any names. It's like, is there a difference? There's no difference. What's in a name? What's in a number? What's in a letter? This is one of those moments in The Prisoner where I feel like somebody's trying to say something, and it may just be a very, very facile, we're not going to use numbers, so we'll just use letters, or it may be part of the setup of the show. there are times throughout the entire series where I wonder if the writer is trying to provide some sort of subtext, or whether it's just me trying to read something into it because it's that type of show.
I'm sure there's an intentional subtext there, though whether it goes any deeper than the obvious. And in a way, it must be terribly convenient and liberating for writers not to have to spend all their time coming up with suitable names for their characters.
Yeah, and of course they never mention anybody's name in the party either. It's always, oh, hello, or perhaps, they do mention the maid's name, I think, but the major characters are all just sort of introduced without introducing them. We already know who you are, I don't need to say your name, which is an odd convention in television. You have to introduce somebody's name when they come on screen for the first time, in some way, shape, or form. And that does lead to some strangely awkward dialogue. If a character is in a TV show and he's all alone, and then somebody comes on the screen who the audience have never seen, but he's supposed to be, his brother that he hasn't seen in 20 years. You don't necessarily call the person by name in real life, because you don't need to. But in television, they always do, because the audience needs to know who this person is and give them a name to stick on them. So in this, it actually, in a way, it feels more natural. I mean, why would the hostess need to call the prisoner by name? She knows who he is. Hello, darling, how are you? I mean, it feels more, in a way, it feels more natural.
Indeed, and I'm terribly bad at remembering names of characters on television. I don't necessarily pay attention to those introductions, because how do you know when a character is introduced whether or not they're going to become significant? It's not always the case that it's terribly clear. Mm-hmm. So I guess I just don't allocate memory space to it, don't pay attention to it. And then, because it's not necessary, you kind of know who the character is. And this demonstrates it in a sense. You know who the character is because you clock their appearance. When they reappear again, you remember them because you recognise their face or recognise their voice. Or maybe even, in some cases, oh, that's Peter Bolt. Or even if you don't remember the character's name.
You recognise their archetype.
Yes.
Here's the defector nasty spy. And then the woman is the Mata-Hari type spy.
Yep.
And, of course, the third one, C, is a whole different story. We'll never know what that was about. But, so they are stereotypes, and they're just played that way. They don't, it's irrelevant. It's just part of the spy genre that he's participating in. So, after his second bout, he goes more on the offensive. He starts using his spy capabilities, and tracks down the lab and, works his way through the equipment when no one's there so that he can kind of piece together, I'm lying on this bed. They've got this machine with pictures of the party I've been dreaming about. Here are some drugs. Here's some files with the people I've been dreaming about. And I think it's reasonable he puts it together, assuming that you don't think that it's...
That seems to me quite extraordinary that he puts it together. But I suppose the difference is, again, if you were in the belief that technology was quite close by, then it wouldn't be absurd to imagine that someone like Number 6 would be aware of that technology and would be aware of the kind of equipment that might be involved in its deployment. But to us, from a modern perspective, if you saw some cables and some electrodes and some oscilloscopes and some drugs and some files and a bit of film, you wouldn't automatically think, hey, someone is reading my dreams.
Well, yeah, all right. I was thinking in terms of, there's a lab setup which I think he glimpsed once. In the very first night, that's how he saw 14. He kind of blinked in his sleep.
Yes.
And so he's got the notion of a lab. He's had these dreams 2 nights running about the party, about A, about B, both of which have been asking him, why did he resign?
Yes, I suppose. If anything had given him the presupposition that it might be that his dreams are being read, whether that was because he suspected the dreams he was having, or whether it was because he already knew about the technology existing, then I suppose that makes the leap much more credible.
I'd have problem. I think, and I'm not claiming number 6 level, but I think I'd make the leap with the wires running from the headset over to a machine that you can turn on and watch the party. I mean, that one right there. It's like either they're recording that party in my dream, or they're placing that party in my dream. And then, the same is true. The more wires run over to the boxes where there's Peter Bowles and the woman. But somehow I would have said this is being done to me.
But placing the party in the dream is the most ludicrous aspect of it. Somehow, when the kind of dream monitoring is first explained, and you get the idea that, okay, you place these electrodes on his head, and then you can monitor on the oscilloscope the brain waves, and you kind of think, yeah, okay, I kind of at least get the idea of how that's supposed to work. And then, boom, you can see it on the screen. Well, okay. That to me is quite an incredible leap, but you get past it because it's quite a quick thing. But then we're supposed to believe that simply by playing a bit of film, you can feed the entire scenario. The 2-dimensional film will feed the kind of totally immersive 3-dimensional experience of being at the party.
Is it a 3-dimension? Is it a 2-dimensional, or is that just the 2-dimensional representation of the brainwave recording that they've made that complicated machine plays?
They describe it as film, which I guess may be
a
simplification, a metaphor they're using. But that was the assumption I had, and it seemed to me to be a kind of an almost this almost childlike belief that I think we all have at some point in the age of film and television, of the power of television and the concept, the kind of through the looking glass idea that if only somehow you could put your hand through the screen and then follow it with the rest of your body, you could inhabit that world, or that characters could step out of it into the real world. And so there's something very compelling about the idea, and initially, at least, it seems vaguely plausible that might be a way of you take a piece of film footage and you use it in order to create a background to a dream, because we know, particularly now in the age of CGI, if we had a bit of film of a party and we had a bit of film of one of our mates, we could, particularly in front of green screen, we could cut them out and put them in the party using visual effects. But if you stop and think about it, it's a long way from that to a completely immersive experience where you have enough data about the entire surroundings, not just what it looks like, but what it sounds like, smells like, what every dimension is, what it feels like under your feet. All of that detail can't come from a simple 2-dimensional piece of film footage.
But the party was a party at a woman's house that he'd been at parties before.
So it was a way of suggesting,
I think the drug suggested
the
party to him, and that's allows them to do suggestibility. And then because number 14 keeps repeating, we're not in control of this dream. What you're seeing happening is where his dream is taking us. So they're just setting up a scenario and said, remember these parties, and because of the drug, he's, oh yeah, okay, got it. I know the house, I know the grounds. It's
a signpost for him.
Yeah.
That what they're doing is pointing at a memory they want him to use.
Yes.
But then when there are things that didn't actually happen, there's another difficulty, because the only actual agency within the dreams is number 6 himself. So when, for example, Peter Bowles surprises him by kidnapping him from behind the doors, we can't assume that's something that Peter Bowles would have done. It's only something that number 6 could have imagined that Peter Bowles would have done. You can't surely really be surprised within a dream.
Yes.
So in terms of giving new information to number 2, I don't see how he could have relied on anything from that.
I don't disagree that I'm not sure. I'm thinking that the idea is that if he had been in a situation where he's resigned, and it seems pretty clear that today is the day he resigned, and he went to this party, because they talked about news of your retirement has, and he said, in just a few hours. So
it can't actually have happened then. The party can't actually have happened.
This particular party didn't happen. That's right. This is
right.
But maybe it was supposed to happen. Maybe he was expecting to go to the party.
Right.
I don't know. But I think number 6 is trying to rely on the fact that he will play out what he thought was going to happen. I was going to resign. I leave. I go to this party. I sell out my country. I go on and do my thing. And so he places these people in it. And instead of number 6 selling out his country, and it seems perfectly reasonable that number 6 might expect the bad guys to ask him to sell out, that he doesn't. He said, well, no, I'm not going to do it. And, well, then they might try to beat me up. Okay, I'm not going to do it. So I can kind of buy the premise. If he was going to sell out, if he believed that he was going to meet A at the party and give him the stuff, then that might have happened in the dream, and he would have given himself away.
Yeah.
So by virtue of that he's actually innocent of what they're accusing him of doing, that it didn't play out the way they wanted it to. But whether or not that would be, hold up in a court of law, I don't think so. But then go ahead.
Do we have any idea how he fed A, B, and C, or how number 14 fed A, B, and C into the dreams? If the film is a kind of signpost to a memory or an anticipation of a party that he then uses his imagination to populate, what is in those cartridges that number 14 plugs into the machine that suggests A, B, and C? Or are they film recordings too?
I have no idea, but I guess they're film recordings.
Right.
But, it's a technology that's probably still a few years distant. So.
Well, it certainly is.
The part of the episode that I really like, in particular, is, of course, the third night at the party when he is in control of it, or seemingly number 6 is totally in control of what they're watching from end to end. Even on the bed, you can see that he's struggling, sweating. He's under extreme physical duress, but he is leading number 2 and number 14 on a merry chase through the entire scenario. But I love the digs he's taking at them in the story. It's like where everyone's doing the conga line and the music is, there's drunk people kind of slouching through the doors, whereas before it was this very elegant dinner party. And, it was kind of like the difference between watching one of those parties you would see in, say, The Saint or Danger Man, or where everyone's dressed up in the very formal and lots of diamonds and, champagne, and they just walk around and there's light music playing, and as opposed to we get up and stuff like UFO, where they're kind of projecting forward and everyone's doing dancing and wild psychedelic music, and this is kind of in between, and number 6 just walking around going, "It's a dreamy party." It's just a staggeringly funny line when he does that.
Yes. No, I think those nods are lovely. I did. From the point at which he goes into the lab, we know that he is going to have some degree of control over this, quite a high degree, probably. We clearly see him pouring away the coffee, though I did think there was some ambiguity. I don't know whether it was intended. After the coffee is poured away, he then drinks a glass of water immediately before he passes out. And because we know the level of the level of deception and trickery and anticipation and one-upmanship that goes on between number 6 playing the game and number 2 and the mysterious number 1 as the game controllers, that it could easily have been the case that the tap water itself was drugged because they anticipated he might throw away the coffee.
Yes.
Did you get that, or was that just
I did.
me being over-imaginative?
I think the first time I watched this episode, I thought that the water was drugged too. And I was thinking about that when I watched it this time. And I'm going to go, I think 51% that he faked passing out so that they wouldn't be suspicious, because he would have to do that, right? I mean,
yeah.
Or the game would be up. So he kind of has to be lying on the floor when they get there. But yes, I agree. It is kind of, did they get him? And I think that's intentional. I think they,
I like the fact there is lots of ambiguity. It's one of the really intriguing things about this show. You don't get fed the answers. Yeah. You often just get fed a whole new set of questions.
Yeah, I think maybe you're supposed to go, well, we know he's on the offensive and he's going to win now, and then, and he's even taking steps so that he won't take the coffee, and then, they got him anyway. So, yeah, I think it's intentionally ambiguous, but I'm gonna give him 1% benefit of the doubt and say I think he was faking it, but it's hard to tell because he doesn't wake up after the experiment. He doesn't get up off the table himself, so he could still be drugged. Maybe that's why he was having so much trouble holding the reality of the party together at the beginning when he was dreaming that. I liked how the contract, the woman, they don't know who number C is. This is the one thing that if you want to talk about the whole technology of the thing not being viable or maybe a little bit far-fetched. The part to me that was the most far-fetched was that they don't know what C looks like, so it does kind of feel to me like they needed to feed a picture in to him.
Yeah.
And that part kind of falls down.
How else do they suggest it? Yes.
And number 14 says as much. How am I supposed to feed that in if, and she says, oh, well, he'll meet the person. It's like, okay.
And from that point on, for me seeing it for the first time and knowing or having a pretty shrewd idea that number 6 was now running the dream, and so what we were seeing was unlikely to be something that they were peeling away to a revelation about, but actually something instead he was feeding them. Pretty much from that point on, I thought, well, it's going to be number 2 who is C. That's what number 6 is going to feed them.
I gotta say, I didn't think that. I mean, I didn't know where they were going with it when I first watched the episode. The first time I watched through it, I was amused because it was so much more cat and mouse in a dream that you could see, you could see him taking digs at them, just like when the dreamy party, or just like when the woman hands him her earring and tells him to bet on number 6. I'm sure it's your lucky number.
Yes.
Everything. And it was so spy cliche. The diamond earring on the baccarat table, you win the roulette table, and you win that, and then instead of giving you the money, they give you a key, and then you have to go find the person who has the matching key, and the door with the 2 keys to go through. It was so much the product of someone's imagination as to what spying is like that it was just terribly funny. And I knew he was going to go reveal something that was, I don't know, going to be embarrassing or problematic for them in the village, but I don't know that I was thinking it was number 2. And probably the reason is because it's a different voice for the guy in number 2 when he's in the mask.
Yes. I mean, I did have a moment's doubt at that point when you actually see him, but
I don't know what I would have expected. I mean, you're right. Number 2 is the logical answer, but I just don't know what I expected.
It's the satisfying answer, and in a way, that's why it had to be number 2. And in a way, for all these other kind of spy, kind of James Bond style spy thriller cliches, are that you have to use those tropes of the genre if you're doing that, if you're kind of sending it up. And you're doing it in a 50-minute story where the real story is actually this whole other level about the kind of the dreams and the technology to read his psyche during the dream. You have to do what the audience is expecting with those genres. You don't have the time to kind of twist it around, because otherwise it does feel terribly unsatisfying. Or to put it another way, it feels terribly right when he bets on the roulette with the diamond earring, and the square, the two spies meet in the deserted square, and the door bangs behind them, and all these other things that would normally seem quite cliched, and in a dream kind of they heighten that aspect of it, the dreaminess of it.
But it is the spy dramas have, in particular, the spy genre has that. There is the dead serious spy drama, and then there's the high concept one, and then you move up well into the spoof type, the Man from U.N.C.L.E. or the Get Smart, or the 60s Casino Royale, or where they take those tropes and they overemphasize them. And this one was elevated a little bit, but not up to the complete spoof, but it was enough that I noticed that it was, they were playing it up hard. Whereas, in the first two party scenarios, they were, right on the spy game, the champagne and the pointed dialogue between the people and the, meeting in the arbor and all that stuff was there. But then it was up a notch. They kicked it up into the farce, just not so far as to make it unrealistic. Well, not unrealistic. That's the wrong word. But anyway, it was up enough that it wasn't a comedy yet, but it was less real. Hence the part of the dream. The other part that is, even more satisfying to me than the reveal that C is number 2. Prior to that, the prisoner is showing him that he's got an envelope for sale, the information that he wants, and then he's trading his life for. And he doesn't expose that to number 2, or to C, I should say, until the last moment when, he rips off his mask and we see who it is. He walks out of where he is, through the doors, pushes them open. And of course, this is entirely in his dream. He pushes them open in his dream, and it's the village. And he walks into the village, walks up to the laboratory, walks into the laboratory, the doors open, and number 14 and number 2 are watching this, and when the doors open, they involuntarily have to look round to see if he's really walking into the room with them. And he comes in.
Terrific.
It is. And he hands him the envelope, and he says, I owe you something. I promised you this. And he hands him the envelope, and number 2 is looking. In the real world, number 2 is looking, and he says, open the envelope. I must know what's in there. And the number 2 in the dream opens it, and it's vacation brochures.
Yeah.
He's going on vacation. And number 6 just walks over to the table, gets onto the table, and then relapses into a state of repose. And
it's superb, and it gives you the fact that, or it gives them the fact that number 6 is, to be able to dream about it, he knows exactly where they are, and he knows about the lab and everything. So he's giving that away, but also at the same time, because they're one step behind. That moment when they look round, they kind of they no longer have any real sense of what's real and what isn't, if you like. They think number 6 is actually capable of escaping from a dream. Being on the table and coming through the doors at the same time.
Well, and that also shows in number 2's desperation to have his dream self open that envelope. He must at this point know that that's not going to tell him what he wants to know. But he can't.
He can't help himself.
He can't help himself. He's so drawn. He's drawn into number 6's dream.
Yes.
And and of course the man's breaking down too. Number 2 is does not do well in this episode. He is under constant pressure from presumably number 1 on the red phone throughout the episode, saying, yes, I know I'm not indispensable, and no, I promise you results, and I know he's too valuable and we can't hurt him, and all those things. So he's a man under the gun. He's
by the standards that we've seen so far, our 4th number 2, I guess, isn't he? He does seem to be exceptionally weak. As you say, he has that kind of underdog, where when he's on the phone, you get the sense of him being very downtrodden. And then when he's dealing with number 14, he puts her in a position where he gives her all of the responsibility, but absolutely no power, because he's not giving her a choice about how she does it. And it just absolutely emphasizes what a weak man he is, because he is kind of stuck in the middle. He's an absolute victim of it, and that serves the purpose of this story. It's the device of having a different number two each week, playing a role in. Last episode it was the Leo McKern version of number two was perfect for that story. This week, this number two is perfect for this story. It wouldn't have worked the same if you'd had a much the more jovial, the kind of more charismatic number two that we had before.
Mm-hmm. And I like at the end when it clicks off, then that's the moment we see the red phone start to ring.
And we know number one he's going to get his comeuppance.
And not only that, does that mean that they are under constant surveillance by number one? Because it's the exact moment when the experiment comes to a conclusion that number one is right there on the phone.
Good point.
Everyone, number two is under... I mean, we heard that in the last one. Number two knows he's under surveillance and he's a prisoner there as well. But...
Well, I suppose when you think about it, why wouldn't he be? This is their MO, so...
Yeah. So there's another location somewhere that's completely... Well, we assume it's another location somewhere that's completely monitoring everything that's going on in the village once again. Or maybe it's just monitoring number two all the time.
Or maybe, if it is in another location, monitoring what's going on in the village, there is more than one village.
Oh, that's true. There could be a bigger network of villages. Yeah. So I do enjoy this episode, partially because it is a science fiction episode, and partially because we see number six again in the last episode. Number six escapes a nefarious plot, so you could say in a way he's victorious, but not really, because his plans were totally thwarted. Yeah, his escape. But this week, he didn't have any escape plan. This was him completely thwarting the village. And so he comes off a lot stronger in this episode, or he comes off a lot more victorious at the end of this episode. Number 6 won. That's what number 14 says very clearly. When number 2 says, we've lost, and she says, no, he won. And she's exactly right. This is his first solid victory against the village.
I would echo the fact that number 6 seems such a strong character in this. I mean, obviously we know his character is very strong, and in a sense, it's all he's got because he has no control over so many other things. But when you have a situation where he's being drugged and he's having these dreams induced in a way that he can't control, his reactions, for example, when he sees number 14 in real life, the way he approaches her at the table and initiates that conversation, you do get this sense that he can't win because there's only so much he can control. But you also get the sense of he is quite fearless, and he's smart, and he's curious about what's going on. So he is going to take every opportunity to find out as much as he can and do as much as he can to thwart them. And he's not going to give up on getting away.
So, 2 questions. I'll put the first one out there and says, this episode is not one of those 7 we discussed last week that Patrick McGoohan considers to be the core.
The original 7.
The original 7 pieces that he would leave be. Do you think that's... I know you haven't seen the rest of the episodes, but in other words, do you think this episode stands out differently in a way that shouldn't be part of what you envision as the prisoner?
I don't...
Go
ahead. It doesn't seem that I have a norm, as it were, yet against which to set it. It's quite a different episode, as I've mentioned. The first thing that struck me about it was it's much more of a science fiction episode. Not that that's a bad thing, and it was a very good, enjoyable episode, and it had, I suppose, some of these things certainly in the kind of meta dream stuff at the end, where he kind of circled around into the lab in which he was lying while he was dreaming in his dream, and that had this kind of very twisted, surreal logic to it that I associate with The Prisoner. So it felt to me like a very prisonery sort of episode. And so from the limited knowledge I suppose I have about kind of what The Prisoner should be about, it certainly wouldn't have seemed to me that this was a massive departure.
I mean, I have to look at it from the standpoint of having seen all the episodes and knowing, where it's going, and so, but I don't think I've ever really looked at it from the standpoint of saying, okay, I need to pick these 10 episodes and set them aside and see if there's a commonality of thread to the 7 that he wanted and the 7 or the 10 that he didn't want, because there's more that he didn't want than he did. And yes, I would say that this episode stands as a not atypical episode of The Prisoner. How about that? So, I mean, it doesn't, from the whole tapestry, it doesn't stand out as some sort of jarring difference. But maybe if I just looked at those 7 episodes, because The Prisoner does span quite a gamut of types of episodes, from very sort of back and forth in the village kind of things like the arrival, to these sort of science fiction-y, so it's like A, B, and C. So I'll contemplate that before our next podcast and see if I change my mind, looking at the titles and looking at which episodes that McGoohan really wanted. Maybe that might change my view of the series as a whole, in a way, because I might like it less or might like it more, depending on what he had intended.
Well, I'll certainly be interested as we go through to look at which ones were among the McGoohan 7. I suppose one of the things about this episode and the last episode that might surprise me a little bit as a new Prisoner kind of viewer is that I suppose my expectation, knowing that it's the whole scenario is it's set in the village, both of the episodes were quite extensively outside the village. Episode 1, that was properly all in the village, but these 2 haven't been. And whether or not that's typical is I guess something I shall come to see. But
well,
go ahead.
I
think that's a relatively small point compared to the overall feel of the episode, which doesn't feel dramatically different.
Let's see, The Chimes of Big Ben is actually the 5th episode to be filmed, I believe. And this is the 10th to be filmed.
11th according to
10th,
Wikipedia.
Okay. But I'll take 11th. It's up there. It's not in the beginning. My understanding is that The Prisoner had a very high demand for its budget. So in the initial pitch to Lou Grade, he asked for a lot of money per episode. They didn't necessarily get all the money they wanted. So looking at the script information on this particular episode, the writer was told, we don't have much Port Merion filming location on this one. It's stock footage, sets on the back lot, and anything you can find here at the studio. And so he went down to the studio and poked around the lots and found places to film and wrote the story to go for that. So it may very well be that a budget-saving measure said we need to use, a standing, classy house set, and I think they said one of the sets was from the Dirty Dozen. I think that street scene where he goes into at the end with number 2 was a set used from that. So, that does play into it. There are some episodes that play 100% in the village, and are obviously shot in Port Merion. But I think the last episode, Chimes of Big Ben, even the stuff that was shot that was at the village, a lot of it was not. Like all the scenes of, say, number 6 and number 2 talking while Nadia is swimming out to sea, that's definitely not shot in Port Merion. Where she was swimming out to sea, I don't know, but it was, a lot of studio-bound stuff. So, there's some practicality in it. There's the reality of television crashing in on the fantasy that is television. So, anyway, and my second question was, and I think you answered it in that last batch, but I asked you at the beginning of the episode, and I'll put it on to you again. Did you like the episode?
Yes, I
Okay.
did. Yeah, I enjoyed it a great deal.
I think you dodged it. Well, there's a lot more science fiction. I'm like, well, that's, to me, that means I liked it. But
I think you said, what did you think of the episode?
I may have.
But and that was one of the first thoughts that occurred to me. But no, certainly in terms of enjoying it, I don't know if I could choose between whether I enjoyed this one or the last one more, because I think there were different aspects of it. This one felt more. I suppose I enjoyed the ideas in it, and it felt quite a coherent, well-structured episode, which may reflect the fact that, well, no, actually, both of them were, neither of them were early in the production, were they?
Yeah.
But certainly, the last one, The Chimes of Big Ben, had a kind of quite adventure, thrilling, escape. Cold War vibe to it, which I enjoyed a lot. So there were different things to enjoy about each of them.
I kind of wonder.
Both strong episodes.
I kind of wonder if we're seeing the studios look at it. In other words, they've got all the episodes sitting out there in front of them, and they say, how do we draw people into this TV series? And so they've taken the necessary pilot episode, which kind of establishes the format. And then they've taken an episode that is grounded very solidly in reality for the most part, with the spy and, building his way out and escaping. And that's establishing the character, his resourcefulness, and the types of mind games that they're going to play with him by, how large the deck is stacked against him. I mean, that he can get all the way back to what he thinks are his friends and colleagues and still be in the village. And then in this third episode, they've taken us a step further. We're going to show you how resourceful the prisoner is, but we're also going to start showing you how far the village can really go in their efforts to, because there are some far out episodes to come. And I just kind of wonder if they felt these were a couple of particularly strong stories that could kind of ease your way into the village, into what other episodes you might see, because I feel that that these two are very strong. So
it's working for me. I mean, I say they're strong episodes, but also I'm enjoying the breadth and the fact that each episode is doing something quite different. So it's unexpected, but still very enjoyable. Very, you've got the central performance from McGowan carrying it, so you can have something that is quite a different kind of story from the one that was told the week before, and I like that.
And he doesn't have to be dour like he always is in the village.
Yes,
he's got the opportunity to do a little different type of acting, being at a party or doing some punch ups.
Yes, and both of them. Again, touching on that theme you're suggesting of deliberately choosing these episodes to be the audience's early introduction, give a bit more about the character of number 6 before he became the prisoner, because we have in the Chimes of Big Ben, he goes back to his old colleagues, so we would see how he would interact with them, and in this one we have him going back to a party, and so we see how he is like working a social occasion, and that's very different from how he is and how we would expect him to be as the prisoner in the village.
Yes. So yeah, we've fleshed out the character a little bit more, so that may help. So now next time, if I'm not mistaken, it's Free for All.
Indeed.
And Free for All is the second episode made. So we'll see how that works, and it's definitely part of the McGowan 7. So, which I'm going to attribute to you. You can trademark that, but I'm going to use it anyway. The McGowan 7. That's what we're going to call it from now on.
So we'll have knocked off a good, well, almost half of them in our first few.
Yeah,
we've got through three already.
Yeah, and then of course, 2 of them are going to be held out for the last 2 episodes of the series. And then the other 2 come kind of in the middle.
I suppose you would expect them to be bookending the series, and then maybe whatever's left to be scattered throughout.
Simon, thank you for joining me.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
And we'll pick up again with Free for All on another episode of Fusion Patrol. So I hope you'll all join us again next time on Fusion Patrol.
We hope you've enjoyed this retro episode of the Fusion Patrol podcast here at the Fusion Patrol Classics YouTube channel. For new episodes of our audio podcast every week and our entire back catalog, come visit us at fusionpatrol.com or subscribe in iTunes or most anywhere fine or even disreputable podcasts are found. You can also support our podcast at patreon.com/fusionpatrol.